949. Good morning, Dr. John.
Good morning, Mick.
And I believe, Dr. John, we're going to look at a bit of news that came out in the last week or so in regards to 6 quiet galaxies out there in the Milky Way that became blazing, I can't even say it, quasars?
Yeah.
Is that the word?
They usually call it quasar.
Quasars. There you go. And scientists are a little baffled because it happened so quickly.
Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? And I guess we first of all have to think about, what is a quasar? And the word comes from a combination of a couple of words, quasi-stellar objects, objects that emit a radio source. Now, what does that really mean? It means a radio emission from something a bit like a star. Mm-hmm. Right, so really it's a descriptive term, but do we really know what they are? No, is the short answer to that. And it's just something that we observe, and it's the bright centre of a galaxy. It's believed to be powered by a supermassive black hole, and we don't know much about them either. So really that's what a quasar is, and if you don't know any better now, then you probably won't, because nobody knows really what they are. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was very, very interesting because these other galaxies are outside our Milky Way galaxy. Now, when you think about it, what the world believes is that our universe is 13 billion years old. Mm-hmm. Right. So in a 13 billion year old universe, in the space of one human lifetime, if you observed one amazing event, that would be an enormous coincidence, wouldn't it? Yes. Over 13 billion years, and what's a human lifetime of 70 years? Mm-hmm. So here we have half a dozen similar events in different galaxies outside our Milky Way, right? Mm-hmm. All in the space of a few months. Now, I mean, it makes you wonder whether maybe the time frame could be a bit wrong. Yeah. What sort of a coincidence is that we would see half a dozen similar events in different galaxies in the space of a few months when the whole shebang is 13 billion years old? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. No. And when you think about it, really, I think the main lesson to be learned is that the time frames of the secular scientific world, what they put on events, I think that's very, very suspect.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you see all of these things superimposed on a believed background of millions and billions of years, it's got to be either the greatest coincidence imaginable, or maybe that long time frame's wrong. I think common sense would say that. And actually, the astronomical news has been pretty interesting lately. You know how I've spoken quite a few times about asteroids that are observed to be whizzing past. Yep. And an asteroid is a big space rock. Yep. And there was another one in the last month that whizzed past in between the distance of the Earth to the Moon. Yeah. And that's pretty close.
Very close.
And we've had one of those a month recently, and plenty of others outside the distance from the Earth to the Moon happening every month. And really, I think that's pretty interesting. These are called, close shaves, and a lot of them are not picked up until a couple of days beforehand. Mm-hmm. And I've said before, what the Bible talks about the time of the end, where the stars are falling from heaven. I think that's exactly what it would look like. If we found quite a few of these all coming at once, and remember, some of them have hit. We had that explosion over Russia a year or so ago.
Yeah, got on a lot of dash cams.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what it would look like the stars falling from heaven. So and they seem to be happening with a bit more frequency. So maybe we ought to wake up and think maybe the Bible is right after all.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And all those timelines that the scientists are writing down for us, their theories are incorrect, particularly when they're coming out with John from Creation Ministries International, who's been talking to us this morning about a few quasars out there that have all done some amazing things that all the scientists were left scratching their head about. And another thing in the news, Dr. John, was an interstellar comet. They say it's the second one ever detected. Of course, there was one last year called Oumuamua that they thought might have been a spaceship from another world at first, and then they realised it was just a rock. But it was a big long rock, so they thought, maybe it was a spaceship rock, but it wasn't. But they've found another one now called 2I Borisov. And it's the second one ever detected, interstellar, which means it comes from a long way away.
That's right. And they're expecting to see quite a few more in the next months or years. And again, it's a similar theme to what we've just been talking about. Mm-hmm. If they're coming from outside our solar system, way out there, then presumably if the world's time frame is right, then they've been travelling for a couple of million years, or maybe even longer than that, And here we see two of them in the space of a few months. Now, what sort of a coincidence is that? Are they actually racing and trying to get past one another? Because really, when you think about it, if they've supposedly been travelling for several million years or hundreds of millions of years or whatever, how come they suddenly all appear on our doorstep at about the same time? I mean, what sort of a coincidence is that? And it's just like we were talking about with the quasars. There's got to be something wrong with the time frame. It does make a lot more sense if our universe is only a matter of thousands of years old, but it doesn't make any sense at all if it's millions or billions of years old. It's too much of a coincidence.
Yeah. So
I think, again, we don't want to take too much notice of the time frames that we see bandied around in the scientific press. I mean, we had one again last week. Some scientists have decided that by examining the magnetic moment in some rock particles, gravel, they have deduced that our Earth's magnetic field is flipped multiple times over the last however million years.
I read that. That was another one that left the scientists scratching their heads saying, it happened a lot more than we expected.
That's right. And so what they're examining is little pieces of gravel and finding that their magnetic orientation is different, and the interpretation of that is that they've got that magnetism in them from when the poles might have been the other way round. So they've decided that the Earth's magnetic poles must have flipped multiple times. Now, think about it. They're examining bits of gravel out of sedimentary rocks.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
they probably did have their poles flipped many times, but it could have been because the rock flipped.
Well, no, I'm not sure that that's the explanation. I don't think there's any evidence of flipping at all.
Well, in a big flood, they could have flipped.
Well, I think they might have formed in a big flood, and we know that big flood wasn't all that long ago. It was only about 4,500 years ago. So I think they've just got jumbled up and reorientated as they've been settling down in the sediment. That makes more sense to me than multiple flippings of the Earth's magnetic poles. We've never seen it flip.
No, well, the interesting thing, though, all these last three stories, whilst they're big stories in the science news, they're all stories of how scientists are scratching their head because they can't understand.
That's right.
Yet they still have their theories and still say, this happened so many billion years ago, but they're all scratching their head going, but we don't know how or we don't know why.
Yeah, that's right. And it really is something that I think people need to realise. You cannot trust the time frames that are put out there. they're all multiple millions of years, and I think people have to realise that there isn't really any experimental verification of these timeframes. They're just years plucked out of the air because that's what's already believed. But the evidence that is examined is not actually suggesting that.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned last week while you were away, Dr. John, just in regards to ages, there was another story about, the headline was, "A mind-blowing study just confirmed Earth had living organisms 3.5 billion years ago." And I read the study, and you weren't here to ask the question. So, of course, I had a look at all the machines or things that they used to test this particular sample of rock, and it included things like energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, I don't even know how to say it, Raman spectroscopy, nanoscale secondary ion mass spectroscopy, and stable carbon isotope analysis. I actually went and looked each one of those up because you weren't here, and they're all to do with checking out what's actually in the rock. None of them are actually, can give you ages. So at the end of the story, there was sort of nothing in there that gave an age. They all just told you what was in the rock. Yeah. Yet people reading the stories don't know that. They don't go and look up each one of those things to see whether they're actually some sort of dating method or anything else. And in reality, that story, just like the others, is all just a big theory.
Yeah, look, it all sounds scientific because they're using these wonderful scientific techniques, but as you rightly said, all it is examining the piece of rock or whatever, and the time frame is a belief. The technique doesn't give a time frame. It's just a way of examining things, and really, some of these claims are just outrageous. I mean, there was another one on the climate change thing that came out of New Zealand last week, suggesting that a 2 degree Celsius rise in average Earth temperature might melt the Antarctic ice cap so that the water levels rose 20 metres.
Ooh.
Now, 20 metres is quite a bit. Now, that has to be untrue because the Bible says that there's never, ever going to be another flood that will destroy the earth. Now, a 20-metre ocean rise, that's going to do quite a bit of damage. So I think if you want to believe the Bible, I'd say you can dismiss that out of hand.
There you go. You're on 94.9. It is 25 minutes past 8. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and he's answering your questions. Simply text them through to 0401 from Creation Ministries International. Who's answering your questions? 0401 949 949 is the text line. Again, 0401 949 949. If you have any questions, please send them through to Dr. John. He'll be happy to answer them. And of course, this morning we've been talking a little bit about the stars and also climate change. And I know, Dr. John, we every now and again see a story come through the papers. I even read one this morning about, the ice age that's coming up. You see them now and again, but more often than not, you'll see stories about, sea level rising and the hot that's coming rather than the cold. Interestingly, they're all written by scientists, seeming so anyway, and they all seem to be really smart. Who's right? Who's wrong? What's going on?
Yeah, look, I think it's really tragic what we are seeing at the moment because part of the problem is everybody's aware that there's got to be political agendas behind all of this, and people hate being scammed and they hate being kidded to. And I think the Prime Minister was absolutely correct in denouncing some of the hysteria that's going on in the area of climate change. I mean, when you think about it, all of those school children walking out of school, they haven't done any research of their own. They've been manipulated and they've been told what's going on, and they're believing it and they're getting worried and scared and whatever. But how much of it is actually true? And then you had that little Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, who wouldn't go to the UN from Europe, so she had to get from Europe to America to speak at the UN. Wouldn't go by air because that's polluting. You know, so she had to sail over there in a yacht that wasn't going to pollute the atmosphere. And I read that there's this new word now in the English language, flight shaming. People are now scared to fly because air travel is polluting the atmosphere, and you know, so now you've got to be ashamed when you actually have to catch a flight. I mean, you know, where are we going to with all of this? And I think people are beginning to push back against some of the extreme claims, because remember, we've had them over the years. We started with I think it was Paul Ehrlich, you know, back about 50 years ago, and then some Japanese research came out, and we've had our own Tim Flannery here making predictions about Warragamba Dam and all of these sort of things. And I think people are beginning to see that all of these outrageous predictions are just not coming true. And I think the same thing is going to come for some of the more spectacular ones that we're seeing. And I watched an interesting program on the ABC last week on the drum. And they were talking about the change that we're seeing in scientific research. Now, people imagine that scientists are there researching away and they're looking for truth. Right, so they're going to examine all the evidence, no matter where it leads, and come up with the conclusion. But that's not what we're seeing now. You know, we're seeing funding going towards research that's going to come up with an already known conclusion, and that then conclusion is then used as ammunition for the political agenda that the funders want to push. You know, so it's not as if science is now searching after truth. It's searching after answers that are going to push a political agenda. And that really is a sad end. I mean, I don't blame the researchers for it, because, you know, they've got to be funded doing something. But you know that there won't be any funding for research that's going to go contrary to the political agenda, and any of those papers are going to have to be peer reviewed, and they're not going to pass the peer review part of their assessment, and they're not going to get published in any reputable magazines. So really, science is being a little bit selective at the moment, and I think people are beginning to realise that. And there is going to be a pushback against it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's no doubt we do pollute the earth, and it's nice to clean it up. But yes, some of the stories push a little hard, and some of the fear-mongering is scary in itself. You're on 94.9 this morning. It is 18 minutes to 9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and he's answering your questions. Simply text them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, a couple of days ago, a giant, they call it a flying reptile, was discovered in Australia, and it was about 4 metres wide, which is quite a big reptile. 96 million years old. That's quite specific, isn't it?
Oh yeah, 96 million. But look, it really is interesting that these figures are just plucked out of the air, and because that's what's believed. The fossil itself didn't tell them that it was 96 million years old. But I thought there was a very instructive lesson in that discovery. It was discovered up there in Winton in outback Queensland. And supposedly it had been buried there along with a lot of other dinosaurs, because Winton is a noted place where, you know, most of or many of the Australian dinosaurs have been found up there in Winton. Winton being famous because that's where Banjo Patterson wrote Waltzing Matilda. So Winton's a very, very famous place. But look, it was said to be deposited there because there once was an inland sea in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might remember a couple of years ago I went to Coober Pedy.
Yes.
Now, Coober Pedy's in South Australia. It's actually about 600 k's south of Alice Springs. And all of the fossils there, they were in an inland sea as well.
Yeah.
And last year I went to Canowindra, and there's a lot of fish fossils there in Canowindra. That's only a couple of hundred k's west of us as the crow flies. So here we've got an inland sea down there in South Australia and up there in Queensland and here in outback New South Wales. And you might remember we talked a couple of months ago about the pippies up on the mountains in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had the whale fossils up in the mountains in South America.
Yeah, in the Valley of the Whales
the
over
Valley
in...
of the Whales. I mean, there's a few inland seas around the place.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering
They're everywhere.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was just one inland sea that
Yes.
covered all of the land and produced the same sort of thing all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any evidence of inland seas in Australia. We have plenty of evidence of fossils that have been buried in the outback, but how have they actually got there, and why would there be inland seas all over the world?
Yeah.
I think the evidence points to just one sea
Giant
all
flood.
over the whole world, because what we see is that every one of these discoveries really fits into the biblical account.
Yeah.
And I say this week after week. You know, the Bible is never actually disproven by the evidence. It's only denigrated, I suppose, by opinion, but not by the evidence itself. And its track record is so good that I think we need to take stock, and we need to take the story of Jesus seriously. Particularly, that comes out of the same book that talks about Noah's worldwide flood, for which the evidence is massive, and we're seeing that all over the world with these scientific discoveries. So look, if that book is true, then we really need to see that what is also true is the judgment that's going to await all of us. And we all need to be sure that we're recipients of the free pardon that Jesus is offering. And we don't want to miss out on that by believing pseudoscience, which is a lot of what this research is. We don't want to miss out by believing that. So we need to take our Bible seriously, because nothing in that Bible has ever been disproven.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly when you see these stories, I mean, the stories, they're in mainstream media. This one, Swinburne University of Technology, they put a lot of the information together, and then, of course, it's been published in Science Alert. And really, they only found a few bones of this thing. And the story they put together, doesn't only talk about, where it was and, surrounded by inland seas and rivers. It talks about the dinosaurs it used to compete with and the fish in the, the local ocean or river system. And, they paint such an amazing image.
Yeah.
But they've only found a few bones, and none of the information points to what did they use to date this particular fossil.
Well, there isn't any information about that, because it's just an opinion plucked out of the air. And what it preyed upon and what animals it lived with, that's all just part of a belief system. And I think we need to realise too that a lot of the scientific researchers are not using common sense. I mean, they're looking very carefully at the research that they're doing, but they don't look at the wider picture, that there's been other research elsewhere in the world that has found similar things. And maybe it would pay to try and use a bit of common sense and coordinate all of these things and try and paint a bigger picture than just the little picture that they're painting in the area that they're researching. And if they did that, I think they would see that the evidence does point to that global flood of Noah as being the cause of all of the fossils, or certainly a very, very large percentage of the fossils that we find all over the world, all buried in a very, very similar manner, all jumbled up together, not representing any order of evolution, but representing a catastrophe on a global scale.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the solution is really in a book. We know where it all happened, and if you want to buy the book, it's called the Bible book. You're on 94.9 this morning. Thank you, Dr. John, for another very informative week. Dr. John, we did get somebody sent through a message. Thank you, Dr. John, for talking about climate change and normalising it. I have no intention to sail to Victoria next time I visit family. Please speak more about this current subject, and thank you that's in a language I understand. That was sent by Tricia. So, yeah, more about that in the future.
Yeah, great stuff. All right. Well, thank you, Tricia. That's wonderful to get a text from you.
Yes, and we also had a message which was sent through as a voice message. This is a text line, guys. Please text your questions through 0401 949 949. You can text them through any time, and if they come through after Dr. John's gone, that's okay. I'll send them to him.